Recording in progress, another episode of the Square and Compass podcast. We are visiting virtually, anyways, Alaska, which is on my bucket list, not only for Masonry, but just in general. I love to visit Alaska. I've never had the chance yet, but we're visiting with Most Worship Brother John May, past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Alaska. Thank you so much for being here.
It's good to be here, Brother Cameron.
And I mentioned off the start, not that, I don't love my brethren from Alaska, but the reason I'm dressed up fancier than normal, normally I wouldn't be wearing a suit and tie because I don't like to dress up, but I had to show off this this tie I got when I was at the Grand Lodge annual communication from Fraternal Ties. They gave it to me for free. I wanted to make sure to give them a shout out because it is a very, very cool tie and I like it a lot. I left some links where you can find it in the description to this video and on my socials and all that good jazz. So thank you, Fraternal Ties. And with that, Brother May, as you mentioned, we're talking offline. It's easy to get hung up on the titles of most worshipful or very worshipful. As you're saying, right, brother is the most important title. So with that in mind, how did you go from Mr. John May to Brother John May? Where did your journey in Masonry begin?
Well, it was one of those things where I always kind of had an interest in, I shouldn't say I've always had an interest in Freemasonry. I enjoyed American history, particularly the Revolutionary War, and I was always perplexed on how a lot of these guys, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and several others could really, take what was, kind of a ragtag group of colonies and beat the biggest empire in the world at the time. And I always arrived back that Freemasonry was something they were a part of, and perhaps that was what inspired, or what really empowered them, so to speak. And I spent a lot of time researching Masonry, and of course you have some truth out there, but there's a lot of garbage, conspiracy theories, and you name it. But fast forward high school, going to a maritime academy. Several years later into my career on ships, I believe I was 27 or 28 years old at the time, and I was working on a small tank vessel that was working the east coast of the United States, and I would ended up staying up on my after my wheel watch with the captain, and the captain had grown up in New York on Staten Island, went to some good schools up there, and it was like a history lesson going up and down all these various rivers on the East Coast. And he's pointing out stuff from the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, you name it. And it was just absolutely just fascinating. It was worth losing the sleep just to get that history lesson. And he had the square and compasses ring on. And one day I say, Bill, so talk to me about the Masons. What's with it? And he just got excited, and he said, well, he starts pointing me in the right direction. So at the time I was living in Baltimore, outside of Baltimore, and he was living up in Pennsylvania. So he says, yeah, just start looking for lodges. So I'm looking for lodges, and I'm finding all these lodges out there. I'm seeing there's some of these grand lodges, and of course, in Maryland, you had the mainstream Grand Lodge, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, and then of course there were clandestine Grand Lodges. And then I'm finding all these other lodges, and I'm like, well, what the heck? Which of these is actually real? Which are legitimate? And I get back on shift with him, and I said, man, I'm completely perplexed. And I'm telling him about my search, and at that point he says, well, go to the Scottish Rite and talk to them. So I get off the vessel again, and this time I drive on down into Baltimore to the Scottish Rite building there. And I walk on in. I meet a very, very interesting gentleman, illustrious brother and Dr. Hans Wilhelmsen. And, he told me his story, and I said, well, I'd like to join. He says, well, you need to become a Mason first. I said, well, that's my problem. I'm trying to figure out how to become one. So at that point, he refers me to the Grand Lodge, and I start looking at the Grand Lodge of Maryland website. And from there, I start contacting lodges. And before too long, I was finally able to petition after months of search, probably closer to 6 months, and petitioned, and I went through the degrees and became a Mason. And then not too many years after that, um, we ended up relocating to Alaska for job opportunities. And fortunately, there was just a lodge right here in Valdez where I now reside with my wife. And, the rest is kind of history.
And what would you say, um, you know, you're a little bit unique in that, or maybe not in your experience, but in my experience, oftentimes when a brother moves away from his home jurisdiction or his mother lodge to a new location, it's rare that he maintains his Masonic ties. He may continue paying dues to his mother lodge, but to become active in a new jurisdiction doesn't seem as common. Why is it in your case that, moving, very, very far away from your mother lodge, you still were able to, and you still chose to become active and remain active in the craft in your new location?
Well, at the time in Maryland, I was working at a very extensive schedule of shipping. So when I got off the vessel, I'd have a little bit of time to here and there to go to Masonic activities, go to a lodge meeting here and there, but I wasn't really able to be as active as I would have liked. So moving to Alaska into a management job, I read extensively, so I really had an idea of, you know, getting into Alaska, finding the lodge. Um, it was just something I really wanted to do. Um, of course, it was a lot different. Maryland was very formal, and remains very formal. Alaska's very much blue collar in its lodge and its approach to lodge. Some lodges differ, but you go to a small town lodge, it's kind of a one size fits all. You don't really get to pick from your lodges. Um, for me, it was just the desire to continue on and to continue to learn. Um, not to take anything away from the formative years, I guess you could say, of my Masonic experience, my Masonic journey. I didn't get a whole lot out of it because here I would go and I would memorize in Maryland what they call the catechism, and what Alaska they call the posting lecture. Um, and I'd ask my coaches and mentors, what is this all about? What does this mean? And none of them could really explain what it was about. So I was thinking, okay, here's my opportunity for a second chance. And I get up to Alaska, and by and large, I was kind of met with the same thing as, we have brothers that are good brothers, but as far as informed Masons, we're kind of few and far between. So I continued on with it. But I met a lot of brothers along the way, and I started reading more, and I started to identify the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, in Masonic research, Masonic writing, and really started to give myself a broader, or I shouldn't say a broader, but more a broader scope of what's actually Masonic and what's not, and really delving into what we quickly term the rabbit hole up here, where we start kind of diving into subjects and coming out, you know, miles outside the cave elsewhere on a whole different course. So, um, it's one of those things where it's just not a one-time shot. You go through the degrees and suddenly you say, well, I'm a Mason. If you're engaged in Masonry, it's a lifelong process because you're constantly learning more about yourself, refining what you know, and picking up new approaches to things, new points of view, new knowledge. Um,
What does that word engaged mean to you? To be an engaged Mason or to be engaged with Freemasonry?
well, to be engaged with Freemasonry, you really gotta find the time from your busy schedule. Find, if you have the time, you have to put your priorities first, family, work, um, you name it, all those things that really come first. But it's taking that time that you do have that's available to you and jumping into it, whether it be reading, whether it be working with your brothers, or trying to apply masonry in your life, whether it be a mental exercise or whether it be going out and helping an old lady across the street. Um, there's certain aspects that are important to each man. For each man, while the experience varies between Masons and the journeys will vary vastly. Um, some men truly need the service component in their lives in order to make their Masonic journey a fulfilling one. Others need more I guess you could say, the esoteric or the side driven towards attainment of knowledge and truth. And some need a mixture of everything: the social, the charitable, the knowledge based. And for some brothers, it's purely I guess you could say, a social exercise. I'm not going to say one way or the other what my opinion is on one path or the other, because each man's path is their own. But it's how they choose to apply that path. Are they going to be a good man? Are they going to be a good representative of what masonry is? Is it improving them? And that's really what it comes down to. Um, I chose kind of that path of esoteric knowledge, um, seeking that truth, seeking that higher meaning. But along the way, the social aspect has helped me improve my life greatly. The charitable aspect has helped me improve my life greatly. And I cherish every moment of it. I may not be the first one to go diving headlong into a fundraiser, but if it's important enough to one of my brothers, it will be important to me, and I will be there to assist them.
Is there rooms? Is there room in Freemasonry for uh, standards in terms of engagement or in terms of what it means to be a Freemason?
Well, I'm going to start jumping into kind of some of the unpopular stuff here. I believe that where we are today with masonry, the push on Grand Lodges for more membership, and at the same time they talk about guarding the East Gate. But you go to some of these conferences, like the Conference of Grand Masters of Masons in North America, the whole thought process is a very narrow focus on membership, membership, membership. And then, as an aside, oh, we got to guard the East Gate, and then they come back to membership. The problem that we have as a whole in the fraternity, and it's been this way for some time, is that we look at some way to measure our success, and in doing so, we quantify it through the number of our members. So as the fraternity grew, we started to have lodges and grand lodges that acquired buildings and made some grand structures. And unfortunately, um, dues stayed artificially low. And when brothers started passing away, dues remained artificially low. A lot of the ways we manage our money, the way we manage our lodges and our properties altogether, that process remained archaic. It really didn't evolve with the times. And now we've gotten to a point where, unfortunately, brothers are used to paying abnormally low dues, and we've come to this whole mindset that if we don't recruit more Masons, the fraternity is going to die. Well, that's an organizational issue. It's not a Masonic issue. Masonry itself, it's an ideal. It's a system of rituals that has adopted numerous schools of philosophy, thought, ideas, and it's supposed to be a proving ground for men to expand their minds and to apply those ideas, those philosophies to their life. The organization has floundered. And I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I would much rather be in a room with 10 men that I could call brother, that I know that we can have a civil conversation with. And no matter how much I disagree with this man, I know that I would be able to trust him with my family, and I know that I would love him as a brother, versus a man that would come in, carry a dues card, and speak ill of his other brothers because it's just the character. So we're at kind of a point now with Masonry where we gotta, for lack of a better term, shit or get off the pot. What are we going to do? We need to kind of figure out this management thing. And until guys are willing to be receptive to new ideas, to doing things differently, it's never really going to change. We're going to kind of continue being this status quo of watching lodge buildings close down, watching lodges surrender their charters, and watching less than suitable men come into Masonry, guys that, 50 years ago wouldn't be permitted in because they were of a foul character. I'm all for quality over quantity, and until the Grand Lodges kind of break free of, until the Grand Lodges really lean out their processes and trim the fat, so to speak, reduce some of these budgets, reduce a lot of this antiquated bureaucracy, we're never going to arrive there. We're always going to be dependent on bringing in more members, or we're going to have to raise the dues. And the only problem I really have with raising the dues is that it adversely affects younger members of the fraternity, younger members that are just getting going in their careers, that are just starting off with families, good men that want to be engaged in Masonry, but would otherwise be excluded because of a dues hike. So it's a careful balancing act.
It is a balancing act, and I agree with much of what you said. I certainly agree that the emphasis on membership is misplaced, because, well, I've used the metaphor, it's like filling water with a leaky bucket. I mean, or filling what? It's filling a leaky bucket with water. Because the issue is, at least in my opinion, if we can't, I don't know what attendance is like in your jurisdiction, but in Ontario, in most jurisdictions I visit, attendance is about 10 to 15%. If you're lucky. I mean, if you're not able to get good attendance from the members you already have, why do you think the new ones will be any better? I mean, you're going to run in, and it's a second order issue in the sense that I do think membership needs to go up for the health of the craft, but to deal with membership, to deal with maintaining of buildings, you need brothers in the lodge first, formulating plans and volunteering and participating. If you don't have that, it's very hard to deal with any other issues, beyond that.
Well, we talk about maintaining a building though, and kind of my issue is I fell into this lodge in Valdez, and it's been a struggle to maintain the building the whole time we've been here. When I first got here, the ritual was so shoddy, I thought that I'd accidentally walked into a clandestine lodge of Masons, and they spent 3 hours bickering about bills, and that was every meeting, and it was discouraging.
But is
I
that
see it when I go to lodges, but I
a
see it in lodges in state and other places as well when I go traveling. Um, the building's not the lodge. The lodge is composed of the Masons. So what I find heartbreaking is when a lodge becomes so consumed in in what I refer to as peripheral business, the lodge building, trying to fund this stuff. If you can't fund it, you need to downsize. It's the reality of it. For instance, say for instance, you go ahead, you buy your starter home with with your wife, you get your career going, you advance through your career, you're making more money, you have kids, and pretty soon you outgrow the starter home and you have equity involved in that, and you sell your starter home. You move into a bigger home. Well, let's just say as an example, it's yourself, your wife, and 4 kids. Well, you say you go ahead and you spring for a big house. You've got the job and you can afford all that. Um, but you're still a young man and you're still kind of getting around, and we're talking 4 kids, big house, and now all the kids are off to college and you're paying that bill. Well, by the time they're done with college, you're sitting there now looking at, okay, I got to retire. It's a cyclical cycle of humanity. So you go ahead and you retire. The big house is expensive, and you're looking at your finances. You're saying, if we sell the house, we downsize, we get ourselves into, you know, something like our old starter, or say an efficiency. It's something that we can afford and actually continue to live out our retirement savings on. With the lodge, it's kind of the same way. World War II was a huge bump in North America for masonry. We had soldiers returning from the war, and they filled the lodge halls. We're close to 4.1, 4.2 million Masons nationwide. The problem is that we never really replenished those numbers. I mean, I just think about it. If we had each one of those men from the greatest generation had brought a friend to lodge, or say brought a son or a grandson to lodge, every few years, and brought that man in and mentored him, we wouldn't really be suffering from, per se, a membership issue and having the struggle to keep some of our buildings and maintain some of our charitable initiatives. But that didn't happen. So the reality is that for a lot of these lodges, we kind of hit our high water mark.
But
And
could it
now
happen? Not to
I'm
jump in, but so it didn't happen in for any number of reasons. And I've done, tried to do a little bit of research on this. For whatever reason, those returning World War II veterans didn't, maybe because for whatever reason, they didn't do what was necessary to maintain the numbers of membership, or to maintain, to maintain the numbers. And why that is, there's a lot of different reasons. Times were changing in the 60s and 70s compared to in the late 40s, when a lot of those veterans were joining. But I'm not so sure. I think a lot needs to change. I have my ideas on what needs to change, but I'm not convinced that we can't see a resurgence in Freemasonry, both in terms of numbers of members attending, which are different metrics, and in terms of the preservation and protection of our built architecture and built heritage.
Cameron, I think it's very possible to see a resurgence, and I think we're kind of looking at one now, but I am being pragmatic with a number of these things. Right now, if we're going to bring a man into masonry, and we're sitting there talking about how we're going to save our building, and that kind of becomes the onus of the conversation, the onus of the lodge meeting, we're actually stealing away from that man's Masonic experience. We're basically implanting this this idea into this man's head that the fraternity is struggling, that it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I see it with guys where they talk about, well, we need to get more members, we need to do this, we need to do that, because we're dying off. And the reality is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When guys start to believe that, apathy reigns. A lot of it's trying to remove a lot of that from the lodge. from the lodge culture, from the lodge environment, because otherwise, if a new Mason comes in and they see this, what motivation do they actually have to stick around, and what kind of experience are they getting out of it? With my lodge in particular, we've moved business out of the lodge meetings, and it's all managed by committee now. And I understand many Canadian lodges and grand lodges have a board of general purpose just for that reason. Or not, I shouldn't say just for that reason, but that manage such affairs. In the United States, we do not. But I look at some of the other things that are going on.
Sorry to interrupt. That's interesting. When you said in the United States you do not, so to your knowledge, then, for all the Grand Lodges in the United States, right, there are 50 of them altogether, one for each state, to my knowledge. Do any of them
Well,
have a board of general purposes?
well, you've actually got 51 with DC, 52 if you count Puerto Rico as well.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, I believe there's a Grand Lodge in Puerto Rico.
There's a Grand Lodge in DC, right? So 51 at least, maybe 52. Do any of them, to your knowledge, have a board of general purposes? That's interesting.
So I'm not really certain. I know in Alaska, the Grand Lodges are kind of a different animal. We have a finance committee. We have a grand treasurer, grand secretary, and they run a lot of the day-to-day stuff. But on the lodge level, most lodges do not, to my knowledge. Because what I end up seeing when I go into a regular U.S. Grand Lodge, they'll go ahead, they'll do their introductions, and depending on how formal the lodge is, it can become quite the horse and pony show. And then you go into sickness and distress, and then they jump into the business portion. And when they go through the business portion, basically the whole lodge, here's the business, they vote on it. Cameron, am I really going to sit there and, just to give you an example, I've been in lodge meetings where they will sit there and they will argue for an hour or two on who left the lights on for the lodge. And, the electric bill is running high. So they finally, after an hour or two of arguing about it, okay, let's go ahead and call the vote. And they call the vote and they vote on it. And then you have like a group of guys that will say, no, I vote not to pay the bills. Well, okay, we're going to go ahead and watch the power company turn the lights off. To me, it's superfluous. It's
Well, that's definitely not helpful or healthy for a lodge to engage in. I've been in some meetings where, yeah, it devolves into not a lot, I'm pleased to say, where it devolves into kind of minutia that really isn't giving anything. It really isn't making a better lodge experience for the membership, which is always an unfortunate thing when it happens.
And it's a matter of changing the culture. It's a matter of changing things up. If your lodge supports it, if you can actually drive the change and drive lasting change, then do it.
I like that statement. What to you is the current culture of Freemasonry? How would you define the present culture?
Well, that depends on the lodge, because each lodge is different. You're going to go to some lodges that have a ruling clique, a ruling hierarchy that are absolutely set in their ways, and you're going to go to lodges that they're open to new ideas. They want to do different things. They want to progress. Look at what California is doing with their micro lodges. Part of the problem in the United States, and I'm sure there's probably torches and pitchforks being pulled out of the sheds right now. The part of the culture in the United States is we have kind of this supersized me culture, right? They equate that big lodge as being a successful lodge. You have, a lodge that has 300, 400, 500, 600 men on the roster. But what happens if, we're only seeing like 10, 20, 30 show up? You have a big lodge roster like that. So what California did is that California is kind of different from Alaska in that they have a strong centralized program, whereas Alaska is more decentralized. But what I like about California is that even though they are very centralized in how they do things at the Grand Lodge level, they do, they really are there to support their lodges. They're encouraging their lodges to try new things out. So what California did is they sent a bunch of guys from the Grand Lodge over to England, and they went around to the various British lodges to see how the Brits were doing things. They came back and they said, well, look at the number of Masons in London proper, and look at the number of lodges, and look at the average number of Masons in a lodge in London. And that was right around 20 to 25 people per lodge. Whereas, the average lodge in California might have 100 or 200 people. So what California ended up doing is that they reached out to all these brothers that were still dues paying members, but they weren't active in their lodges. They got them together in a lodge hall, in conference rooms, convention centers, and basically did kind of like a coffee and a cake type get together with these Masons that weren't coming to their lodges. And they said, my brother, you're still a dues paying Mason, but you haven't been to lodge in years. Why? And many of these men would say, well, I want to be a Mason. I believe in it. I just didn't fit with the clique. The lodge didn't match my culture. And they made it kind of a intermingling of all these brothers that largely did not fit with their lodge. They revised their Masonic constitution to allow the creation of what they call micro lodges, in that these men basically, once they proved that they had a plan together and that they could do ritual, had a suitable meeting place, be it rented or you name it, they allowed them to become a micro lodge. And these micro lodges basically would be capped at no more than 30 members. What happens across the pond and what's happening with these micro lodges is that when they grow to start getting close to 30 members, they look at breaking off and creating new lodges. The idea is that each man in this lodge has something to do. They have engagement. They keep the numbers artificially small so that it becomes an engaging atmosphere. How can you really say that you are a close friend and brother with 300 or 400 men? How can you actually say you know what's going on in Tom's life if you're trying to know if you're trying to be an active and engaged brother in the lives of 199 other men? So what they're finding with the micro lodges, at first there was some resistance from the larger lodges, but once these micro lodges started going, the larger lodges started visiting, and they realized, wow, this is really a good thing, because these guys are doing things differently. These guys have a close relationship. They have that, they're forging the chain of union in their lodges. They're doing creative things. They're managing on a lean scale. They don't have crazy budgets, but when they do things, they do them well. So why are we not encouraging that? Why are we not looking at what's going on in other parts of the world where Freemasonry is absolutely flourishing? Look at Mexico and South America. Basically anything south of the United States in the Western Hemisphere. Masonry is absolutely flourishing there.
Cuba. Flourishing Cuba. And I would point out, and this has made me unpopular myself in some circles, that those jurisdictions, well, I can't speak for all of them, Cuba, Brazil, Mexico, and the Philippines all have attendance requirements
Absolutely.
as a matter of course, which I'm not sure. I mean, I'm bringing that up in my lodge. I don't know why we don't require attendance of our members the same way we require dues of our members.
Well, a lot of it has to be on the consent of the members. You and I are only one. I shouldn't say unfortunately, you and I are only one vote. And if we were more than one vote, we would be dictators and we'd probably rub someone the wrong way. But I look at what we've got going right now in Alaska. We're putting together our very first Lodge of Research and Education. We've got the bylaws drafted, and we're just going through the bureaucratic red tape right now. But we do have an attendance requirement, and there's attendance requirements, and there's work requirements in that lodge. So the idea is, if you find if you were to look at what's going on in your masonry, and it doesn't have to be Cameron Adamson looking on what's going on with his Masonic experience, but any brother out there, the one thing I learned as Grandmaster is that if you want to inspire a change in masonry, you do it locally. Grandmaster, they're there for a term, they have some influence, but largely they come and go, and a lot of what goes with them. But ideas never die, and it's keeping those ideas fresh, keeping them out there, and having that discussion, keeping the engagement out there. And I tell you, I learn from young Masons all the time, and really retool my thinking frequently based off of their experiences, and it's a great thing. But you find like-minded brothers in a local area. Look at what your Grand Lodge requires to start a Masonic club, or to become a lodge or dispensation, or even become a chartered lodge. If you find like-minded brothers and you all are able to agree to a common framework and a new way of approaching masonry, so long as it's within the acceptable boundaries of your Grand Lodge, then why not? Why not? Why not become the first lodge in your district, or the first lodge in your jurisdiction to be an exclusively Masonic table lodge? My lodge up here in Alaska, we throw on kilts and we go up into the mountains and we do a Master Mason degree dressed as Scots. It's awesome. My lodge is doing some crazy stuff outdoors. We go four-wheeling, we go whitewater rafting, we go fishing, we go hunting, we go on hikes. And I tell my guys, I said, look, if we were to lose a lodge building, it's not going to be any sweat, because we have options. We have freaking kilts, and then we have the will to go up into the mountains to do a ritual. It's pretty dang cool. So the only thing that's holding us back is ourselves.
And I mean, you're absolutely right. I think it really is everything. I think one of the challenges that Freemasonry has, or Freemasons have in their relationship to the lodge or to the craft, is, they'll pick something, and that will be Freemasonry, like, to them. Like, I was talking to a gentleman who, we don't really see him very often, came out to a social function, right? And he said, this is Freemasonry. It's me hanging out with having a pizza and a beer, or whatever it is. And it's like, yes, that is Freemasonry, but so is, a degree. So is the business meeting. So is the building. So is the cottage trips and outdoor events and kilt nights. And it's everything, right? I think a lot of Masons, because I think Freemasonry has become incredibly personal, but not in a good way. It's personal in the sense that, okay, what do I get out of Freemasonry? And that's what I'll focus on. So I enjoy social nights, so that's what I'll do. It's like, but the question shouldn't be, how does Freemasonry make my life better? The question should be, how can I make Freemasonry better? Right? That's what the question should be.
You are absolutely on point with that, brother, because those brothers, those men that come to Freemasonry to serve themselves, are only serving ego, and they're not going to get as much out of it than those that come to serve. Like, you look at the officer stations, where do you start your youngest officers? You start them as a steward. And any man that's incapable of serving his brothers, whether it be bringing them a drink, whether that bringing them a plate of food, whether it be busting their plate and washing the dishes, if it's beneath that man to serve, then he's disqualified himself from leadership, because it's all about service. And you don't need to be an officer to serve, but any brother, if you're not willing to serve others before yourself, you're not going to take anything away from it. You're not going to really, that's what Masonic labor is all about. men come for Masonic wages, but they do not come for the labor. So how are they actually going to benefit from the wages without the labor?
And I mean, I'd say it's even more, it's not even, it's one thing if you're not willing to serve, and you're absolutely right, a Freemason should be there to serve the lodge and not the other way around. Um, but are you willing to be bored? Are you willing to be unhappy? I've had brothers say, well, I've seen, 400 degrees. I'm not going to come out to this one unless I have a part. If I have a part to do, I'll come out. But I've seen the degrees a million times. Why do I have to come out again? And it's like, well, who cares if you've seen it 400 times? Because it's not about you. It's about that brother being initiated or passed or raised. And when he comes, when he's able to see you in the stands, when he's able to see that you attended and you shake his hand at the end of it and say, I'm glad to have you as my brother, that's important. And if you have to be bored through an hour and a half, which you shouldn't be, you should always be paying attention. But even if you say, I've seen this a million times, why see it again? Because it's not about you, it's about the initiate. And you should be there for him. That's being of service to your lodge, just being present. Your presence is a service in and of itself, outside of anything you may or may not do.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. That's it. It's an act of service, whether you want to or not. I mean, granted, it's on the part of the lodge to help keep that balance. And if the brother absolutely can't make it because of family or work, by all means. But I think we need to get back to kind of running attendance. I think the courtesy of an RSVP, that's one of the things that, that's one of my pet peeves is lodge meetings coming up in a few days and put out the call for who's going to be there so we can cook food, and you don't get any responses, or you get a few responses. Or planning an event, oh boy, you have guys that say, oh yeah, I'm going to be there, then the day of their no call, no show, and then the brother either planned it or the lodge is on the line to pay for food and lodging for that particular individual who doesn't show up. We're a volunteer organization, but I think having a higher standard in just the common courtesy of an RSVP to say I'm going to be there, or picking up the phone saying, hey, we're 2 weeks away from this thing and now I can't make it because I got to work. Or even a call, a day before or the day of to say I can't make it. Sure as heck beats having a commitment to, from someone and then them not showing up. But you're correct. I mean, it is being of service to your brothers, just, showing up, and you never know who you're going to meet. It's one of those things that you'll be amazed. I'm not so much saying this to you. You get it. This is to the folks out there. You might show up to a lodge meeting, or you might show up to a ritual or some Masonic event, something that, you say, well, I don't really want to be here because I'd much rather be watching the game, or I'd much rather be catching a movie somewhere. But the people that you meet, the conversations that are had, I mean, you never know what you're gonna discover. My predecessors were not, when I was his deputy Grand Master, great guy, fun-loving guy, jump on a motorcycle, go anywhere, go do all kinds of cool stuff. He's the perfect case of, fun-loving, social guy, and he would make it to all the I guess you could say nerdy Masonic functions. And he said, wow, I'm really glad I went because I learned a lot out of that one. And I thought it was just going to be kind of boring. Not only did I learn a lot out of it, well, shoot, we went out and had fun too. You never know what you're going to get, guys. You never know who you're going to meet.
And, this will be a controversial statement. on my part, so feel free to push back, but to what extent do you think, the phrase, either the phrase, we're a volunteer organization, which I've heard it since I joined, or uh, family work comes first, or in the States, I understand sometimes it's deity, family work comes first, in Ontario. I never said it and I never will, but when I was joining, brothers told me family work comes first. To what extent do you think that's become a shield for Masons to deflect themselves against criticisms of kind of not pulling their weight in lodge?
Well, it becomes a bit of a crutch, and when the whole discussion on it's a volunteer organization, I got a feeling that probably originated from up top, and it's since filtered its way down, and it should never really be thrown out like that. Um, I try to be very, very particular about who I bring into the lodge. It's not always the case, but I am particular now about who I keep my company with the Lodge of Research and Education. Um, when we first started going with it, the guys that I approached were guys that I know were tried and true and would actually contribute. And it's tough kind of in this day and age because of, you have a lot of folks that are coming and going, and just the digital environment we work in and just the sheer population. We're not all in small towns where everyone's known everyone for their whole lives. You kind of have some of that in Alaska where the small town guys won't travel outside their small town because screw them, they beat me in the high school championship 20 odd years ago. Um, but it's tough to kind of vet someone that's just arrived in town or they've been in town for a few years and you haven't really got to know them. So my suggestion is take time to get to know them. Don't be fast to throw a petition in their hands, but lay out the expectations. Yeah, we're not here to interfere with your family. We're not here to interfere with your work. But if you gauge the person and they're showing up for dinners, they're showing up for events that are, largely stuff that's untiled, get to know their character, find out who they are. Um, but you got to know if they're going to contribute, if they're going to be a part of it. If they're going to sit there while there's good conversation going on and not really say a word about it, not really say anything, or they're not really going to pick up and do anything, or they'll show up for a few minutes and say hi, bye, and go away. Um, they're not going to get a petition. Um, and if they happen to get their hands on a petition, I don't have to vote for them either.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and I'm proud of the work that I've done or that Harmony Lodge has done and my lodges have done with trying to be a bit more spending more time getting to know a candidate, spending more time to getting to know an applicant before he becomes a candidate, before the final vote is taken. Um, but I think, and this goes back to even the standards, discussion way at the start of this. We could use the term culture. I think that the culture of Freemasonry, or the standards, the cultures go. The culture of Freemasonry right now is a membership-based culture, as opposed to, or it's a membership-based term as opposed to like a skilled term. What I mean by that is it's kind of like belonging to a church in some ways, or belonging to like a club that, it's like having a magazine subscription almost. Like it's not having a card in your wallet that says you're a Freemason. The way it's treated right now, it proves nothing beyond you pay your dues every year, at least in North America, right? There's no other way to gauge anything about the person. Whereas when something is a skills-based designation, you can make an assumption about that person's dedication to it. So if somebody says, I'm a musician, right, that doesn't mean he belongs to a music academy. it means he can play an instrument. He can play it well. So you assume, right, with that designation. And, I think the challenge and the problem I have with statements like, it's a volunteer organization, family work first. Like, if I say I'm a musician, and then somebody says, all right, prove it, play an instrument, and I can't play that instrument, I can't turn around and say, well, I have a family. Like, I have a wife and kids. Like, I can say whatever I want. If I can't play the instrument, I'm not a musician. I may have a valid reason why I don't practice or why I'm too busy to practice, but I can't call myself a musician. Whereas there's no standards for a Freemason beyond in North America, beyond did you pay your dues? And it's like we're afraid to judge other brothers. We're afraid to say, you know, you're not being helpful to the lodge. You're not a good Freemason. We're kind of the focus is, did they pay their dues? Well, then they're equal to everybody else. But that would be equivalent to saying, the guy who belongs to the music academy is equivalent to Jimi Hendrix. Like they're not the same thing. And when you take that attitude, it's very hard for anything to grow. If musicians treated everybody equally, and you could pay $100 ticket to see Jimi Hendrix or the schlub down the street, music doesn't grow. And so is it any wonder that Freemasonry has this challenge growing when it's viewed not as a group of highly skilled individuals engaged in an important task to make the world a better place, which is what Freemasonry should be, but it's viewed as something you pay $100 for and it sits in your wallet.
Well, absolutely. And Cameron, that's probably the most poignant assessment I've ever heard of that. And I love that example. I'm gonna have to frame your picture. That's just so well said. And the reality is that's essentially what we're doing. We have no value in it. Most guys don't have much skin into it unless they really want to work their butts off and do something. Just looking at it from that standpoint. I mean, those are the guys I want to have in lodge. Those are the guys I want to have as my brothers. And we look, Mexico on south in the Western Hemisphere, a lot of those lodges are doing that stuff. You don't advance through the degrees lickety split. And I would have loved to have had that kind of Masonic experience. There are times I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I'm a Master Mason, I've got 32nd degree in Scottish Rite, blah, 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 Grand Master, you name it. But there are a lot of times I just sit there feeling like a meek entered apprentice because there's a lot that I don't know, and I'll be the first to admit it. I have my opinions of things, but I'm never going to poo-poo someone else's. And unfortunately, there are guys that, honestly think, oh, look, I've got all these lofty titles, but, they aren't good representatives for what Masonry truly is. But, man, I love that. I'm a musician, but, oh, let's hear you play. Well, I can't because, oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's, and that's always how I felt about it. I take pride in the fact I've never told anybody family and work comes first. Family and work comes first sometimes. Obviously, it has to, but all the time, like I don't buy that. When you've got, there's so many ways to take part in a year, so many activities you can take part in. Even if you just boil it down to meetings, there's most lodges have about 20 meetings in a year, give or take. One business. I don't know if you guys go dark in the summer, but in Ontario, we tend to not meet in July and August, not have official meetings. But the other 10 months, it's usually a business meeting and a degree. So, that's 20 times, and you can't make it out to like one of those 20, two of those 20. I have a very hard time, accepting that. Unless there's obviously, if you're in a coma, you live far away, whatever it might be. But as a rule, I have a very hard time.
Absolutely.
And then I just, I've used that example before. I'm a musician, but I can't play because I have a wife and kids. It's like, well, then you're not a musician.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. A wife, kids, and a day job. Yeah,
So,
that's it. Wow. That is the best example I've ever heard.
well, I appreciate that. Others have not been as fond of that example, but you're the ones who aren't very active in the craft. So I think, I appreciate I hope you feel free to use it and, go nuts with it. It's all yours.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you should put a patent on that one and sell rights. It's great. Oh, wow.
Now, I do want to touch base a little bit on the Alaskan Masonic experience specifically, because to my knowledge, Alaska is the largest state in the United States.
It is.
It's also, I'm assuming, the most um, undeveloped. Like there's the most amount of pristine area, nature reserves. Like I think it has a very small population. Ontario is somewhat similar when you talk about Northern Ontario, which is very, very big and a lot of still nature left and a lot of very small towns spread throughout. It can take a few hours to get from one town to the next when you're up there. What's it like,
Absolutely.
especially as a past Grand Master, what's it like trying to administer Freemasonry in a jurisdiction that is, very, very big, but also very spread out, perhaps, and amongst its lodges, and to get from one lodge to the other. Are you taking bush planes? How do you administer those type of things?
Well, so coming out of Valdez here, the flights cancel regularly if you can't see the mountains through the cloud, and we're right in a big bowl. Oftentimes if you schedule a flight, you could be waiting at the airport in the amount of time it would take you to drive to Anchorage or Fairbanks before the plane might leave. And sometimes you could actually be waiting longer than that, or you could be sitting at the airport in Anchorage or Fairbanks, or rather Anchorage, trying to fly back to Valdez, and you may not be able to get in for a number of days. So it's most of the travels by the road. So Valdez to Anchorage is 305 miles. Anchorage to the Matanuska-Susitna Valley is about 265 miles. And then Valdez up to Fairbanks is 365 miles. So usually, 5 hours to get to the Matsu Valley, 6 hours to get to Anchorage, and a minimum of about 8 to get to Fairbanks, just because it seems that extra 60 miles, you want to stop a little bit more just to kind of stretch. And there have been times it's that Fairbanks trip's taken me over 12 hours, just because you're going across 3 mountain ranges and you're in really bad roads and bad whiteout conditions. And summers are beautiful, but the thing with summer, you got to look out for tourists that, tourists do kind of unusual things on the road. And then of course wildlife. Wildlife can be kind of a year-round thing, but especially summertime. And then wintertime, you're talking icy roads, bad weather. So it's you kind of gotta, sometimes it's like, okay, I would otherwise not be driving in this stuff, but I really want to go to attend this meeting to see these brothers. So you up and go. For 4 years in the Grand Line, I was on the road every week, logging 600 plus miles. We've got our lodge, the Kenai Peninsula. So, you take your travel time to Anchorage, then you add anywhere from 2 to 4 hours for those lodges. So you've got Seward, you've got Sterling, which is just outside of Soldotna, and Soldotna is basically Soldotna and Sterling are right there on the Kenai River. And then further on down the peninsula is the New Lodge in Homer. Then we've got lodges that you can only get to by plane or ferry. You've got Kodiak, you've got Sitka, you've got Juneau, and Ketchikan. I could get to Skagway going through the road system, but that's like a 2-day drive, and you got to drive through the Yukon and British Columbia to actually get to Skagway. Cordova is another lodge that you can only get to by plane or ferry. So it's And at one time we had a lodge in Nome, and at one time we had a lodge in ADAC. And ADAC's out in the Aleutians. You might be able to get in on a plane, and but you may not. You might be stuck on the tarmac for a week or two until the fog and the weather lifts.
Well, I just think that's so fascinating. It's one of the reasons I want to make it to Alaska. Part of it's because I've always heard it's an incredibly beautiful place. But yeah, that experience of lodges being so kind of isolated and needing to take a plane just to get to them. I mean, that exists in Canada at some places, obviously, especially when you start talking about up north. But it's where I live now, Windsor, which is the southernmost part of Ontario, right by Detroit. You know, I think I can't remember the exact. I think 90% of our population, some crazy high amount, lives between the Windsor and Montreal corridor. So it's just jam packed with people. And then obviously, getting to a lodge is convenient. You take a bus, you can take a train, you're going to get there, take the 401. But there's something I think romantic. There's something really interesting about a lodge that is isolated and a little bit harder to get to. It seems like it makes the journey a lot more interesting getting there. I'm sure you experienced some interesting journeys as the most worshipful.
Oh, absolutely. Well, just as a regular Mason, oh man, I've made a number of trips this year just to go to lodges in Anchorage in the Valley to help them out with the degree work. Before COVID hit, I was scheduled to go to a number of lodges to do degree work that would have put me on a flight or a ferry, and unfortunately COVID struck, so it canceled a lot of that. But it's good to get out and do that stuff, and it's I try to encourage a lot of these guys to come along with, because they're always fun trips. You get out there, you're going someplace new, you're helping another lodge out, you're meeting new brothers. And then after the lodge meeting, it's like, well, hey guys, let's go grab some grub and grab a beer, or grab a few beers.
Visiting is such an important part. That's another thing, right? It's everything, but visitation, taking the time to get out there and see other lodges and engage in social hours afterwards with them is such an important part of it as well. Um, what's the if I ever were to visit, or any brothers were to visit, do most people fly into Anchorage? I'm trying to think what the main.
Yeah, Anchorage is usually where you want to fly into, and then rentals in the summertime could be absolute ridiculous. Hotels could be absolutely ridiculous in the summertime. Even like a Roach hotel during the summer will demand over $200 a night. So it's kind of like, what the heck? You really need to get out of Anchorage. The city's had its problems now for a couple of years. It was kind of a fun place to go and have a fun weekend out with wife and brothers, and kind of do the social scene. But there's a lot of great places to see in Alaska too. Just all these little old roadhouses that are along the highways here. And that's part of the Alaska's history. When the state first got going, you'd have these roadhouses that were set up every 10s or 30 mile, or every 10, 20 or 30 miles there would be a roadhouse. Basically, it was as much as your horse or your car could travel in a day on that muskeg, on that tundra. You'd get to the next spot, because largely most of these highways weren't paved, they were underdeveloped, they were full of all kinds of stuff. So you'd be able to stop at these roadhouses on your way to wherever. You'd be able to get a meal, get fuel, get repairs to your vehicle, continue on, and you get to the next roadhouse, you get your meal, you get a room for the night. Some of them are doing some really cool things. Some of them serve just great meals. They've got, some have some really nice rooms, some have some really interesting characters, some great history. And some of them are, taking advantage of the outdoors, and they're offering rentals for power sports, both summer and winter. So you could rent a sled, go snow machining or snowmobiling, rent a four wheeler, an ATV or a UTV. to basically get around and do things. You can hire, they have guide services where they'll take you out to do all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, you got a lot of that stuff and it's fun to do. We started, before I became Grandmaster, I started putting together retreats where we would just go out into one of these roadhouses, or we would go out to one of the parks, or we would go out to wherever. We would just meet up, and if it was like one of these roadhouses, we'd have the rooms there, we'd have the meals, we'd have kind of a light program, but we would have fun stuff to do. Hikes, power sports, good Masonic discussion. The wives and families would be welcome, and it was great. We had one 4th of July. We were up on the Denali Highway over at Tangle Lakes, and folks were taking off to go kayaking and canoeing and fishing and running power sports. And at night, we'd all get together. We'd have a nice dinner. We'd sit around the campfire, and it's those things where we have some great opportunities to do that stuff, and we're trying to take advantage of that as much as possible. And it's awesome.
And I hope that those things continue. And hopefully, knock on wood, I get to take part in one of them, because I would love, again, I'd love the chance to visit. I think I saw something, maybe it was last year I saw it now, the next annual communication for the Grand Lodge of Alaska.
Oh, that would be the first Thursday and Friday in February.
Okay.
Each year.
You guys, what's it like in terms of, because they're so kind of out there, do you get a lot of visitors for that? Like, I'm thinking Grand Lodge of BC, Yukon.
Yeah, we'll get BC, Yukon there. They're fairly regular attendees. With COVID restrictions, they've been having a hard time the last couple of years. But BC, Yukon, Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona, we see routine. We see Mosuls regularly or fairly routinely. Occasionally Hawaii. Occasionally we'll get grandmasters from other states coming in. We've had a grandmaster, I believe, from Saskatchewan and Alberta within the past 5 years. Oh man.
Well, my apologies for
we
Saskatchewan. Nobody wants to see anybody from Saskatchewan if they can help it.
Oh man, I sense rivalry.
I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, next door to Saskatchewan. So go Blue Bombers.
I gotcha.
I'm sure. I'm just kidding. I'm sure they're wonderful. With their banjo playing and no teeth and all the rest of it. They're a great group nonetheless.
Oh man.
No. I actually I haven't. I had the chance to visit lodges in Winnipeg, going back to visit my folks, my family. Never had the chance to visit lodges in Saskatchewan. So I'll have to put that on the list, if only so I can make fun of them to their faces and not just over Zoom.
Oh, there you go. So now we
Yeah.
got no, but we get a pretty decent turnout. We have just under 1,500 Masons in Alaska, not including our brethren from Prince Hall, about half of which live out of state. And if you if you actually go further into the metrics and look at the double and triple and quadruple counts for plural memberships, it's about 1,200 Masons. So maybe half of which live in state. So if we have 600 Masons living in Alaska and we're getting a turnout of say 100 Masons for our Grand Lodge, which is typical, we're doing pretty dang good.
Well, I just want to say again, thank you for joining me all the way from Alaska. I would love to get a chance to visit. Hopefully I can one day soon. And you ever find yourself in, Windsor area, Ontario, let me know. We'd love to have you. And thank you so much for your time, most worshipful sir.
Brother Cameron, I appreciate your time, and I really enjoyed the conversation today. And likewise, look me up if you ever decide to make your way on up here.